So, we're going to be talking at this session about a subject which I consider incredibly important, which is parliamentarians in the lead. And I'm not going to repeat the progress that has been made in the last years in the fight against AIDS. I mean, we've been talking a lot about it during the last week. But what I do think we really need to talk about, and that's what this session is about, is how incredibly crucial parliamentary support has been in achieving that progress. And then I'm talking not just about what happens in donor countries, but also what happens in recipient countries. And the reason why I think it's so important we talk about it is that parliamentarians have really played that crucial role, but we are entering a new situation in which we see increasingly governments shifting budgets away from health funding and HIV funding towards migration, towards climate and other issues. We also see in many places all over the earth conservatism on the rise, and that seems to have an impact on the kind of more progressive, more evidence-based interventions that have been supported by governments over the last years. So there is a changing environment. At the same time, it's also interesting to see that in maybe a more difficult environment, there's still positive developments. I want to mention here the fact that the US Congress approved a $6 billion allocation in 2018 for PEPFAR and the Global Fund, despite pushback from the White House. I would also like to mention the fact that in the United Kingdom we saw a £1.1 billion commitment for the Global Fund for the period 2017 to 2019, despite all the Brexit madness, if I may call it that way. I would like to mention that in the Netherlands there is now a renewed or a new multi-party initiative on sexual reproductive health and rights and HIV, which I think is a very good development. In Zimbabwe, there is recent legislation, I understand, that decides that 5% of all mobile phone credit costs will be invested in health, which I think is a great development. So parliamentarians are really making a difference. And I think not only being a driving force behind government commitments to defend aid budgets, I think it's also important to point out that parliamentarians have often been great advocates for evidence-based interventions in how the money gets spent. And interestingly, in many countries, it is a truly multi-party effort. And I think that is very encouraging. Now, what are we going to do in this session? We're going to look at what are the elements of successful parliamentary leadership. What has been driving this major investment in HIV. We're also going to look at how can we assure that we continue to have support for sensitive issues, including appropriate responses for key populations. And we're going to look at how parliamentarians and advocates can better work together in the future in these changing environments to ensure that the response to HIV/AIDS by government stays appropriate. Now, in order to explore this, I'm going to pretty much stop talking, and I'm going to allow and enable these 5 amazing panelists to share all their insights and do that in a way that as soon as possible, I'm also going to bring all of you into the conversation, because I know that there's a wealth of knowledge and very innovative thinking in this room as well. The panel, 5 amazing individuals. Next to me is Barbara Lee. She's a congresswoman for California, and she's also the founder and co-chair of the Congressional HIV/AIDS Caucus in the United States. Very welcome. Next to her is Ricardo Baptista Leite, who is a member of parliament from Portugal, and he's the founding president of UNITE, the global parliamentarian network to end HIV/AIDS, viral hepatitis and other infectious diseases. Very welcome. Next to him, a fellow countrywoman from the Netherlands, Isabel Dirks, who is a member of parliament for the Green Left Party in the Netherlands, and she's the vice chair of the multi-party initiative for SRHR and HIV, which I mentioned earlier. Welcome, Isabel. Next to her, we have Stephen Doughty, a member of parliament in the United Kingdom, and he's the chair of the all-party group on HIV/AIDS in the British Parliament. And next to Stephen, we have Dr. Ruth Labode, who's a member of parliament from Zimbabwe, and she's incredibly committed to TB. She's a member of the executive of the Global TB Caucus. She is the co-chair of the African TB Caucus, and she's the chair of the Zimbabwean TB Caucus. Welcome. And what all of you will love to hear is that all the panelists have committed to be brief and brilliant, which is always nice for a moderator when that's the case, because then I don't have to politely cut them off. But it means that once we open this up, you are expected to be even briefer than them, and if you can, even more brilliant. With that, let's go to the questions. I would first like to explore some of the elements of parliamentary leadership. And I think in order to do that, successful parliamentary leadership, I think we need to look at the people behind the leadership. And so I would like to start by asking each of you to just tell us, why are you personally so committed to this cause? I would say women first, so let's maybe, Barbara, why don't we start with you?
Well, good morning. Glad to be here. Let me thank you all, thank the panelists, and especially all of you for, once again, as we say in my district, staying woke, staying vigilant, and really working to make sure that we stamp HIV and AIDS off the face of the earth. I mean, this is a defining moment, and so thank you all very much. You know, I come from the Bay Area, Oakland, Berkeley, California, and in the late 80s, I started working on our domestic epidemic, especially as it related to African Americans, because, of course, in the United States, the African American community has been and continues to be disproportionately, hit by HIV and AIDS. And then when I went to Congress, my predecessor, a great warrior, his name is Ron Dellums, he and I talked about what we called an AIDS Marshall Plan for Africa, and we started looking at the similarities between the epidemic in the United States and sub-Saharan Africa. So we said we have to work on both fronts. And I actually went to, as a member of Congress, a Republican colleague of mine who was on the banking committee, Congressman Jim Leach, and we talked about a multilateral strategy, and this set the stage for the Global Fund, which actually was the Tuberculosis and AIDS Relief Act of 2000, which President Bill Clinton signed into law. So that served as the framework for the Global Fund. So fast forward to the following year in probably 1999, 2000, well, when President Bush came in. Of course, I was in Congress by then, and I went to the Congressional Black Caucus. And in the United States, we have, in the Congress, caucuses, parliamentarians, members of Congress, who represent certain constituencies, who have certain issues and certain, specific needs and strategies to help overcome historical racism, historical marginalization, historical poverty. And so we have the Congressional Black Caucus. Now we're 48 strong. Then we had about 20 members. And I talked to the Congressional Black Caucus and said, look, we need to take this on in a big way in terms of what's taking place around the world as it relates to HIV and AIDS. So we actually came to President Bush and had a meeting with President Bush, and it was my job on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus to raise the idea of a bilateral response, which ultimately ended up being PEPFAR. And so it was really the Congressional Black Caucus working with President Bush that led the effort to the signing of the PEPFAR law. And I share this because at that point, so it was parliamentarians of a different party, a minority group, working with the majority and working with very conservative members such as the late Henry Hyde. I was on his committee on foreign affairs, the late Tom Lantos, and other parliamentarians, members of Congress who were Republicans. I'm a Democrat, that we were able to do this. And President Bush, of course, took the ball and ran with it as president and signed it into law. And I just think that's an example of how parliamentarians and lawmakers can work, because the actual ideas and the working together started with the Congressional Black Caucus, which ended up with President Bush, a Republican, signing it into law.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that story. I'm curious, when you started this work, did you do it partially because your constituency obviously was affected and cared, or did you also have personal friends who were being, dealing with HIV in their own lives?
It was more both. Personal friends. I was part of the movement ACT UP in the United States, and ACT UP, and also because I, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, had the privilege to travel all around the world, and so I visited Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, especially many times, India, and so my work as a member of the committee and understanding what was taking place led me to know that my moral commitment, and that's what it was. There's no way I could not do this, because in a position such as I was in as a member of Congress, and knowing what I knew was taking place not only in my district but throughout the world, there was no way I could be silent. And so that's why it wasn't necessarily constituency driven, because there's not a real constituency for this issue in America. And that led to this huge opening for me to lead on it. And in fact, everyone joined and said, yes, you're right. We have got to pull together and do something. So it was a combination of all of that.
Thank you. Ricardo, what is, it's microphone-wise easier to move this way, so I'm not classifying you as a woman first now, just to make that very clear. Ricardo, when did you get engaged, and what drove you?
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be on this stage with inspirational leaders, and to be able to speak with all of you throughout the week in this fight to end what we've started, which is end AIDS by 2030. I have to say, there's actually a cheesy romantic comedy called Along Came Polly, which is about this insurance broker and who had a very risk-free life, and this amazing hipster girl who changed his life completely. And for me, asking on a personal note, infectious diseases was that hipster girl that came into his life. As a physician, I was, until the moment I got into my residency as an infectious diseases doctor, I had a very privileged life, I have to say. And when I stepped into the ward and started to deal with HIV and viral hep and TB and all other infectious diseases, and having to sit at the bedside with patients passing away, knowing that their parents were outside, refusing to step inside just because they have HIV, and understanding the fact that people who inject drugs, men having sex with men, homeless, trans, all the people that live in vulnerable situations because the way society has reacted throughout history and contemporary history, made me feel that we had to do something more. And that truly got me engaged. I was already politically engaged, but on the health front, really engaged in working in this specific field. And then I was elected into Parliament. And so I was lucky enough, I was a very junior MP in 2011. It was the beginning of the financial crisis in Portugal. Very difficult time. But one of the main activists, Luís Mendão, in Portugal, he went to the health committee and he said, no matter what you guys do, we want Ricardo to become the chair of the all-party group. And I said, okay, that's a call to action right there. And so we sat down. It was the beginning of the crisis. Other countries that were being bailed out, we were seeing a rise of HIV infections. And we thought we had to do something to stop it. Portugal was an example. In 2001, we had decriminalized drug use, which had led to the decrease of new infections, finally. And so policy driving the infection, or at least being able to stop it. And in 2011, we were able to get all parties unanimously to support the resolution in the Parliament to make sure that we kept on track, and we did. And Portugal was the 4th country to adopt test and treat in Europe. We got 3 cities to join the Fast Track Cities movement, and we've hit 2 of the 390s according to the official numbers. So Portugal, despite the financial hardships, was capable of moving the agenda forward and believing that, as Barbara was saying, parliamentarians can be in that interface between civil society and governments, pushing the agenda, changing the laws that discriminate, that promote stigma, that create barriers for people to have access to treatment. We can change budgets and make sure that the resources are going to the right place, was truly the inspiration then to create Unite as a global network of parliamentarians, so that our efforts, along with all the other efforts already out there, we can work together for the 12 years we have to end AIDS by 2030.
Thank you. Wonderful. Isabel, what about you?
As an MP for the Green Left Party, of course it's in our genes, to say it in these words, to advocate for human rights, for women's rights, girls' rights, and also, of course, for LGBTIQ. Sorry, did I miss one? LGBTIQ, yeah, sorry. So these are the people that are under stress momentarily. And one of the strange things, I would say, in the Netherlands, and that's for me is one of the reasons that I'm very involved in this subject, is that in the Netherlands we have the idea that it's all quite good arranged. That if you have HIV, you're probably not really in trouble because there is medication. You can get all the medication and support that you need. But what we see in the Netherlands, and Princess Mabel already stated that we also see in the Netherlands somewhat a swing to the right. I have to do it for to the right. And that's difficult, because what you see is that there is more discrimination in the Netherlands, that people... Oh, there is a protest, I think. Yeah, can I go on? Yeah, maybe we should attend that. So the difficult part of this is that we are a bit used to the idea that it's all quite good in the Netherlands, and most of the things are, I would say, but there is, as I said, a sort of swing to the right. And therefore the trouble is that there is less attention for matters or subjects like AIDS and HIV, also TB, of course, and other infectious diseases. This is a bit difficult, to be honest. So what should we do?
They have 2 minutes to protest. We will find out. We will find out. They'll probably tell us.
Cesta equal debt.
I'm sorry. Take a microphone.
This is Cesta and FOSTA was passed by Donald Trump in April. It's killing sex workers. It's making us not able to access harm reduction so we can screen our clients. This is bad HIV prevention. This is spreading across the world. The UK wants to now pass their own Cesta FOSTA. The UK wants to pass the Nordic model. The Nordic model kills us also. Stop killing sex workers. Listen to us and include us in the conversation. Who else wants to speak? We want to also thank Barbara Lee for her support on FOSTA. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. Right now, Barbara Lee is our only ally in the USA. And we're asking you, Barbara, to please do more. Please help us with Cesta. We're dying, Barbara. We are dying. We are dying. Please help us. Please help us. Thank you, Barbara. We're asking for decriminalization worldwide of sex work. Decriminalization will decrease HIV prevalence by 50%.
We are also asking Barbara Lee to stand with us like she's done many times in the future, or in the past, I should say, and not have the conference in San Francisco in 2020. Move the conference. Stands with sex workers and drug users.
Boycott the U.S. Netherlands, who wants to talk to your parliamentarian from Proud?
I represent the drug users community. The international network of people using drugs, and I joined sex workers in that promoting the idea of not holding the conference in 2020 in the United States, because we believe that conference will exclude a lot of key population who are affected by HIV, and that jeopardizes the IS, one of the IS principles.
Someone from the UK?
It's been 2 minutes. I have to take the mic.
Oh, only one thing. Please, we're all being, also here in the Netherlands, also the members of Proud in the Netherlands are putting a disadvantage and in danger because of this law. So be aware that this is not a USA issue only. We're all here. And we're all
I appreciate that you guys came by. Thank you for reminding us of this. And we're going to talk about it. I'm not a parliamentarian.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Isabel, finish explaining why you're engaged. And if you want to say anything about sex work in the Netherlands, this might be the moment.
Yes, this might be the moment. Well, this is the cause that you're fighting for as sex workers and advocates for sex workers is, of course, a very honorable one, I would say. And it will very much resonate, I hope, also in the Netherlands, of course. One of the things, of course, is harm reduction. More information about how to prevent from getting HIV and afterwards AIDS. In the Netherlands is so much attention for this. Also in our parliament there is, because we specifically asked for to keep this particular harm reduction program in Dutch policies, and it will. So in this parliament there is no problem to ask for extra money or extra budget. We will see to that next fall, in fall, when we are actually finding our new budget. So we can talk about this afterwards if you would like to. Would be interesting.
Stephen,
Thank you.
can I ask you to tell us what you motivates here what motivates you to work on this issue?
I think first, just to respond to the protest, I've been absolutely fantastic to meet some amazing sex workers here at the conference from America, from the UK, from Kenya, from Indonesia, from many, many places. And to be honest, for me, it's been a huge education and an eye-opener, and certainly the lessons I've had. We had a fantastic conversation last night. It's the sort of lessons that I'll be able to take back to the UK, some of the conversations that we're having. And actually, one of the things we've been fighting for as an all-party group in the UK Parliament is to support marginalised populations in the UK's funding going forward, that they don't get left behind, whether that's sex workers, whether that's injecting drug users, whether that's the LGBT population. We need to make sure they're not left behind when the UK transitions out of countries, and that civil society organisations are supported and listened to. So firstly, you have my full support. What got me interested in HIV and AIDS? I think, like a lot of people, it was a personal experience. I was very lucky before I got elected to Parliament to work for some fantastic organisations, World Vision, Oxfam. I worked at DFID, and I went on a visit to Malawi when I was in my early 20s. And I spent some time there meeting people who had lost family members, who'd had to take on extra children in already horrendous circumstances of deep poverty because of losing people to AIDS. And that for me was an incredible personal experience. It made me realise the challenges that so many countries faced. Made me very passionate. That was what I wanted to spend my career doing, and working some of those organisations. And so when I came into Parliament in 2012, I wanted to make sure I played a role not only on that international level, but also on a domestic level in the UK. Because although we've made some huge steps forward in the UK, there is always the risk that we slip back. And I've been speaking with some people who work with injecting drug users in Glasgow in the last few days, who are telling me about how HIV infection rates have gone up so significantly there because of a failure to respond to the changing needs of populations there. And we need to be not assuming that there's progress. We have to be vigilant. We have to be making sure that we're always alert to the chance to slip back, even where we've made huge progress. But in terms of three big things that I think have made the difference in the UK in putting this issue on the agenda and ensuring some of the progress we've made, I've just put it down to people, to pressure and to partnerships. People who've been brave enough to speak out, whether that's somebody like Chris Smith, who was the first openly gay MP, first person living openly with HIV as a Member of Parliament, who spoke up and showed that leadership. Whether it's people like Norman Fowler, Conservative, opposite side of the House from me, but who was very, very brave in speaking up, speaking to his government in the 1980s. Prime Ministers who showed leadership on international issues like Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, making sure that the response to HIV/AIDS was there at the heart of our development policy. But also David Cameron, making sure we committed to 0.7% of GNI on aid. And Theresa May actually speaking out recently about apologising for Britain's role in exporting some of our criminal laws, our Victorian criminal laws around sodomy, other issues to Commonwealth countries, which of course massively affect the legal framework for LGBT people and people living with HIV in many countries around the world. Pressure, if it's not for the organisations, many in this room, people like Stop AIDS, people like AIDS Fonds, others, putting that pressure on parliamentarians, raising the issues. We've had a fantastic campaign running about the Robert Carr Network Fund, getting funding for that. That delivers results. It put pressure on us. We were able to put pressure on the government, and you see that change happening. And it's about partnerships. It's like Barbara said, it's about working across the House. It's about working across parties. It's working across backgrounds, cross expertises, medical, the activist community, all working together. And working together, and I'm really glad to have met Ricardo this morning talking about that potential for parliamentarians to work together across the world to make sure we continue in that fight. So it's a very personal thing for me, and we've had some huge successes, but we have to be vigilant. We can't assume there's progress.
Thank you very much. Ruth, please tell us what drives you in this fight.
Mine begins in a small hospital. Okay. Mine begins in a small hospital that I worked in. I used to work for a TB hospital years back, just at the early stages, I think the 80s of HIV. One of our TB patients was tested and found to be HIV positive. And I asked him after counseling that, can you tell your wife why you're not responding to TB treatment? That time there was no ARVs. This guy refused to tell the wife. And I got so frustrated. By the end of the week, I really lost it. Then right between me and him and his wife, I just said, I'm going to tell you this. He's HIV positive. And at that time, the issue of privacy was very strong in my country. I was supposed to be arrested. This guy then phoned, he was too sick to go. He phoned one of the local media papers and told them that this doctor has breached my confidentiality. She shouldn't have told my wife. And I was supposed to be taken to court. In fact, the case went to court, but along the line, he pulled out because I'm told his wife at home told him that she would testify and say it wasn't the doctor who mentioned it, but rather that, because there were only 3 of us in the room, rather that he told her, something like that. And after that, I joined the movement of women who were saying willful transmission of HIV should be condemned and a person should be arrested for that. It was exactly that pushed me. We pushed it, it became law. And today, of course, I'm the same activist now who is very worried about the fact that more women have been arrested because of that law. So right now, I'm the pusher again in Parliament to repeal that law. Because now we have art. Now we have art. And I can promise you by end of the year, Zimbabwe will repeal that law. But otherwise, sitting here with you is somebody who is very passionate about certain things. But I'll say something about my sisters here and my brother. I came to understand sex workers when I was a year in Parliament. We were invited to a place called Karnataka, Bangalore in India. And the coordinator of the whole trip was UNFPA plus our National AIDS Council. Interesting enough, they didn't give enough detail on why we're going to Karnataka. They wrote to Parliament and said, we need 2 parliamentarians to accompany the Minister of somebody from Justice, somebody from the police, and some other activists to India. And then they said they are going to visit some centers for the control of HIV, the long story. But when we got to India, in the room where the first day we got to Karnataka, then the introductions were being done. We were a delegation of 12 Zimbabweans. The first girl says, I'm a sex worker from Zimbabwe, and I'm lucky. Okay. The second one says the same thing. So then, because one of the sex workers saw that I was a bit perplexed, you understand? When I went to the toilet, she followed me. She says, Doc, I've come to read the riot to you. There are sex workers in Zimbabwe. I'm sorry you had to meet them in India. So... And you know, I began to understand now why we are actually in Karnataka. India has the same law as Zimbabwe. Something which says in the constitution, you can be arrested for loitering to solicit for sex. So we're there to learn on how the judges in India have failed to remove that law, but have informal decided to ignore it. That was the whole idea, as I was stating point. So when we left and went home, and I actually developed such a beautiful, I still have them on my Facebook, relationship with those 2 girls. Because you spend time with them, realize who they are and what they are doing. They're just nice. They were nice people, you understand? When we came home, the news got home in the press that there was a delegation that went to India to do this and this. And the Chief Justice did something which to today I really appreciate. He announced that there was no need for people to even go and check where. There is a misinterpretation of that sentence. If you say X must be arrested for loitering, soliciting for sex, then produce the person she solicited with, and that the person will confirm that, and men would never agree to that. They would never say yes. So that brought an end for sex workers abruptly being arrested. But we still have another point. We still need criminalized. We have achieved something, yes, but there's another step to be taken. And then there's me, who is chair of the Global Caucus on TB. I don't know whether I should talk about that now.
You know what?
But having said that, I sit on let me talk about the HIV. I sit on the Key Populations Forum. It's a forum which incorporates all the key populations in Zimbabwe. The idea is Parliament needs to know what key populations are going through. And a lot of it has legal connotations. So we have a lot of isms as a nation, as a people. Religiously, culturally, political. Even when once upon a time we had a president who was a homosexual, our existing president, Robert Mugabe, condemned the homosexuals. But he did not condemn the one he sat in cabinet with. Or he was using other people outside to condemn this one. We don't know what it was. So to clean up those mindset, the interaction between sex workers and key population is very important. And I must thank our National AIDS Council. They've been taking parliamentarians across country. It's a very costly process. You put them in a bus and we met sex workers here, we meet bus drivers here, we go to prisons, we meet one-on-one and talk to these people. And talk to whoever we have met. And for me, it has helped a lot. Because it actually does change mindset. Sometimes you even end up crying when you listen to some of the stories, what they go through, how they're abused, all those things, and how the law would help. It's not an easy thing in an African setup, but a parliamentarian is the right person to deal with this issue. The parliamentarian is elected by people. And in Africa, it's not like in Europe where if you're elected, the people don't even know you. In Africa, if you're elected an MP, everybody in the constituency looks up to you, believes what you say. So if you say, hey, that one is a sex worker, don't talk to her, people will actually shun the person. If you say, no, that person is just a person like you, it helps a lot. This parliamentarian is the same person who enacts laws, who brings law to Parliament, to make sure that the issue that you have brought and it becomes law is that very person.
Ruth.
And it's the same person, like you said, who approves budgets. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Okay. We're going to do something. The 5 people on this panel, thanks to these personal introductions, I think it's fair to say that we will not get more committed among parliamentarians anywhere in the world. So this is our chance. We're not going to longer linger on the past. What we're going to do in the coming hour, or what remains, for 15 minutes, is we're going to brainstorm with these 5 true friends of the fight against HIV/AIDS about what are we going to do on these big challenges ahead of us. We have the funding challenge, and we have this challenge of, in the world, less and less support going to evidence-based programming, to key populations, to where the money really needs to go, because that's where the hurt is, that's where the harm is, and that's where the difference can be made. So this is going to become now a collective brainstorming session. And we're going to look at how we're going to change the world together, led by these people, and hopefully then bringing other parliamentarians in to do the same magic. I'm going to ask each of them to tell me what they think in their country can happen to make sure that in the coming 5 to 10 years the fight remains funded and effectively funded. Any bright ideas you have, please share them. How to collaborate with civil society, what you think can be done in order to create these bipartisan, partnerships, anything. Share it, please, and then we're going to open it up to ask people to brainstorm with you on how we're going to do this. This is only going to be as good as we collectively make it. Over to you, Barbara.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And first, just thank all of you so much, first of all, for being here, for speaking truth to power, for these beautiful flowers, and for really making it real. Secondly, I come, of course, from the United States, and in the United States, many of you know that in the African American community, many of the same issues as it relates to poverty, unemployment, all of the gaps, all of the discrimination issues as it relates to HIV and AIDS, we are disproportionately as African Americans hit by all of these issues, just as you know, and are marginalized in the United States. What I am committed to and what I've been doing for many, many years is trying to get first, and I know this is extremely important if we're going to address ending and stamping HIV and AIDS from the face of the earth by 2030, and that's ending and repealing all of these discrimination laws that are on the books. We need to decriminalize totally all states. We need to decriminalize. And that's in every country, but let me tell you, I was on the UN Commission on HIV and the Law. We went around the country looking at the criminalization of populations. And we weren't going to focus our time looking at the United States, but I insisted that we do that. And we brought the commission to my district in Oakland, California. And lo and behold, we found that the United States was one of the bad actors in the world. All right? Who knew that? Who knew that? And that's why it was only because I brought the commission to my district, to Oakland. And so what did we do? We went back and introduced legislation that said to the Justice Department, help these states get these laws off of the books. Well, what has happened is a small bit of progress. And I'm very proud to say that my home state of California had these laws on the books, and just last year we were probably the second or third or fourth state to repeal all of our discrimination laws. So we did do that in California. And so part of what we have to do, and my job, is to organize and mobilize and help other members of Congress go to their states like I did to have them insist that these laws get taken off of the books. And that's a big piece of what we are doing in the United States now. And because Oakland is my home, and where the state of California was one of the first to sign decriminalization laws, it's important that the rest of the country and the rest of the world look at what we have done in California. So thank you again very much.
Hello.
No, I was just going to say, because an issue that's very close to my heart and very closely linked to HIV infection is the issue of child marriage. And actually, until 2 months ago, in every state in the United States, you could marry before the age of 18. Either because the age was too low or because you could, with parental consent, marry before 18. Laws have changed in only 2 states, but not yet in California. So I can't, as a good advocate, miss an opportunity to say, while you look at these laws, also look at the child marriage law, please. Thank you.
We will. Take that back home.
Ricardo, what are we going to do?
Well, first of all, I have to say that when I get back home, the first thing I'm doing is going to tell the Portuguese activists that I was counting on some roses myself and I didn't get them. I have to say that, just 20 seconds to talk about the past, to talk about the future. And because the criminalization is a big thing. And Portugal is a very conservative country. And back in the 90s, with the injecting drug epidemic, which it was in Lisbon and across the country, there was a lot of resistance to decriminalizing drug use. And the only thing that really led the transformation, in a very cynical approach, I would say, was when the crime rates were so high, it was hitting the middle and high income part of society. And it became clear that we could not continue to ignore that. And that's when we decriminalized, despite the fact that many people were saying that we were going to become a drug haven, that drug tourism was going to become an issue. And what we have seen in 20 years of experience of decriminalization was, first of all, there was a mind shift from a justice approach to a health approach. We were able to see a decrease immediately of the number of new infections of HIV. We saw a decrease in comparison with other European countries of drug consumption. Dissuasion was more effective, and of course we did not become a center for drug tourism. So decriminalization works because criminalization does not solve the underlying social issues that have led to this, to many of these issues we're discussing. That being said, Portugal has had unique opportunities now looking into the future through the power of the civil society movements. And they have been able to push. I would have to say that on drug use, of course, it's very present. On HIV, we would like to see more activist organizations within the sex workers community. I think it's extremely important to have a counterpart as parliamentarians because it's hard. And most of our laws are pretty good on paper. And we don't have criminalization. We have anti-stigma, anti-discrimination laws. But we have one of the greatest challenges most societies face, which is the cultural transformation that you cannot do just by passing a law. And that, I would say, looking into the future, is something that civil society, along with politicians, along with those that are most affected in the community, have to work together to be able to push. Portugal believes in multilateralism. We believe in the power. We're proud to see the Secretary General of the UN is a Portuguese citizen. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Secretary General for the International Migrations Office is a Portuguese citizen, which means that Portugal has to continue to lead and come back onto the global stage, also when it comes to funding, despite our small size as a country. But we also have to play a very influential role within Europe. And we have to work together as a union. Our power as a European Union, as Europeans, which I am proud to be part of, we should work towards being a beacon also of hope in the world. We have been leaders in the past of the social model, of being able to bring those that are in most vulnerable populations under a social net, on top of a social net, being protected within societies. And through nationalistic, selfish movements, we have been pushing away from this vision that has been able to save millions of lives and to push for equality of opportunities. Going directly into AIDS, just as a last comment, we have to continue identifying, diagnosing. Portugal has late diagnosis as a big issue. And we have to find people who live with the infection, diagnose them early, make sure that all preventive tools are out there, including PrEP in effective ways through outreach programs, so that collectively we can work towards ending the epidemic. And if there is a country where it is possible, it is Portugal. And if there is a region in the world that has the obligation to comply with the international standards and the commitments that we have made through the Sustainable Development Goals, it's the European Union. And it's time that the European Commission steps up. Thank you.
Isabel, I think we just heard about Portugal, but I think the Netherlands is another country where historically, and I must say proudly, we have been not afraid of dealing with politically delicate issues, including harm reduction, including key populations. We have a new government, there's a new development policy, there's a new policy also on PrEP and you know, how we deal with these issues in the Netherlands. What is your party is obviously not part of government. How do you feel about the new vision?
That you say it's obvious that our party is not a part of the government is very sad, actually, because one of the main things, of course, that we would have tried to change was the way we are dealing with subjects like this. I'm in an opposition party. Of course, the new policies of our minister, perhaps you've heard of her, Minister Kaag, are very promising, I would say. But the idea that you can actually try to change the world by just stopping migration is not the way that we are trying to work on development aid. So this is a completely... This is a different subject, but it's one of the main reasons, I would say, because we have to focus, in my opinion, on development. Not per se on development aid, I would say, but on development. Of course, of all those countries in Africa, the committee, I'm one of the members of the Committee on Foreign Trade and Development Aid. We have visited 2 weeks ago the countries Ethiopia and Uganda. We've also visited all kinds of projects that work with projects for SRHR, all those very inspirational people that really try to change something there. But what I see is that there are so many organizations that want to change something, and what I see is that that we are not enough able to combine the attention, the budget, the people. And therefore, I'm very much inspired by the project of my colleague next to me, the Unite project, because we have to unite in order to really attack this problem together. There is no escaping. This is a subject that concerns us all. And one of the things that I'm very aware of is that perhaps the Netherlands, Western European countries might be sort of okay, but when I look to the United States, when I look to Russia, where the situation is so very delicate nowadays, this is not a problem that will remain in those countries, but that will also come to Western European countries. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to just, therefore, work together in order to tackle this problem. So this is one of the things that we also, with this multi-party initiative, will attack. In this initiative, there are so many parties. Not every party is involved, but very broad spectrum of a lot of parties in this broad political spectrum are involved. So therefore I think it's for us also, well, perhaps an idea again to try to be one of the countries that try to show leadership in this particular subject. And of course, with projects like She Decides, we have done things like that. We have put so much money on the table also to repair. I don't want to be rude, but also try to repair. And this is so necessary, because this is not something that will disappear because we shut our eyes. It just disappears if we work together and try to attack this cooperatively. So therefore, I'm very interested in working together with all the people that are, of course, in this panel, but also with you. And if we, as the Netherlands, can be of any support, if you want our cooperation, or you want our help, or you want our I don't know what, just ask us, and we can try to be able to deliver that. Thank you.
Stephen, I live in London, and so I know that your country is deeply divided about the Brexit question across parties. In that environment, is there still, I mean, everybody here so far is talking about this has to be an all-party initiative. Is there still space for an all-party initiative? And does actually anybody still care about HIV/AIDS in the UK, or is it only Brexit?
Yeah, well, Brexit is a big, big, big mess, and unfortunately, the reality is it is squeezing a lot of other things off the agenda, both in Parliament and in our media and in our political and social space. And I think that means it's all the more important that we do actually have cross-party initiatives like the group that we have in the UK Parliament, who will continue advocating even through that mess. And I'm pretty sure actually in our group we've got people who have different views on Brexit, but we unite around the need to tackle the epidemic. And so I think there is still hope and there is still optimism that you can achieve change. And despite all the problems that we have had, we have maintained that 0.7% commitment. We have made some big strides forward. Not quite as far as I would like, but certainly in terms of provision of PrEP. And this week we had the announcements about the HPV vaccine being available to boys. So you can achieve progress even when things are very difficult. But I mean, I'll let you into a secret, which is probably not a secret to many of you in this room, but parliamentarians often haven't got a clue what we're talking about. Right? Let's be honest, okay? And that's one of the reasons why actually we need to get sex workers into Parliament. We need to get injecting drug users into Parliament. We need to get the trans community into Parliament. We need to get marginalised populations into Parliament. People actually both as parliamentarians, but also actually speaking up, because otherwise, I can tell you, as a member of Parliament, you often are left to your own devices. You're left to often your own prejudices. You're often left at the mercy of groups of people who speak very, very loudly, perhaps in your constituency, but don't actually represent or fully understand the challenges. And that's one of the things we try and do as a group. We try and get people in. We try and ensure we're talking about evidence-based policy. We're trying to talk about policy that's actually based in real people's lives. We have, a very, very difficult media environment in the UK. A pretty illiberal and small c conservative media, which often, really likes to stigmatise different groups. We had a terrible debate going on around the provision of PrEP, for example, where some of the major newspapers were trying to present it as a choice between for paying for cancer drugs or for children with cystic fibrosis, or supporting these terrible people, who are going around and having sex, terrible, And it requires very brave voices to actually speak up and say that's absolutely a false choice. And that, these are all public health issues, and we have to just be realistic about that and not create false choices. So we have a terrible debate going on around the trans community at the moment, with a lot of prejudice, a lot of aggression, and again, that requires people to be bold and people to speak up and to stand up. And I think, that's our domestic debate. But I think internationally, I think the UK has a huge historic responsibility, and not just our history of empire, everything else, the exportation of those laws and some of those prejudices. But there is a real danger at the moment that we sort of go, we've given all this fantastic money to the Global Fund, everything's fine, that's our HIV/AIDS box ticked. Actually, if you look at some of the evidence Stop AIDS has brought out about our bilateral funding actually going down, sometimes the emphasis that's gone away from middle-income countries, where 70% of people living with HIV will be by 2020. These are not easy issues, and we need to be not just assuming everything's okay, ticking a box, ministers going, hey, we're happy, we've done our bit for HIV. We need to be bold, asking questions, providing that scrutiny, and that's why we need all of you out there campaigning and putting that pressure on.
Thank you. Ruth, what do you think needs to be done in the coming years?
I will briefly talk about the Global Caucus of Parliamentarians Against TB. Some of us as legislators believe and know, and there's evidence on the ground, that we will not achieve the 1990, the end mortality of HIV by 2030, or even achieve the goal, the SDG goal, if we cannot control the evil twin brother called TB. Because that evil twin brother is successfully killing those you have spent so much money, the Global Fund money, trying to keep alive. So we need to start dealing with that. So the Global TB Caucus of Parliamentarians is a caucus that is there to try and bring the TB political agenda on the table again, so that we start looking at, governments start looking at TB. And we have more than 2,000 members of parliament, global, who are actually part of that. And we have 130 countries that have signed up for that caucus. We have, we meet and we share. It's almost like peer review. You meet from different countries and you find out how countries are increasing domestic funding for TB and HIV. You look at some of the issues, legal issues around it. But as parliamentarians in parliament, you talk about TB. So for now, as we move on, I'm sure all of you know about the high-level meeting in New York in September. I would want you to make sure that your heads of states are in New York. Because also, as you are sitting here as sex workers, what will kill you is not HIV, it's TB. You have to be there also to picket the heads of state, so that they will know that they need to deal with both issues simultaneously. Otherwise, we are going nowhere. The other issue, what I'm also hoping will happen at the high-level meeting is a side meeting on TB in prisons, which also could be TB, HIV, and in prison, both of them in prisons. Because I think, especially in Africa, it's neglected, it's congested, and because of draconian laws, which say you can't put a condom in prison because they acknowledge that there's MSM. Because since we have decided we want to believe ourselves that it's not happening, but the prevalence of HIV in prison is very high, which means something is happening there. So some of these things we need to share among ourselves as parliamentarians to find solutions. And also, there is a SADC PF. The SADC Parliamentary Forum will be holding a key population symposium. There is a project within the SADC region which actually involves 8 countries. It's a sexual reproductive health and governance program for parliamentarians. What do we do? SADC organizes parliamentarians in those areas, and we give each other targets of what you should be doing at home. And then when we meet, we review what we have done. So there's a symposium actually end of August being organized. I got the mail yesterday. So those who come from the SADC, and the lady said you can invite anybody else who wants to come and share their experiences. While it is for SADC parliamentarians, but everybody is invited to come because we learn from each other. This is what we've been doing here. And also there is ICASA. We have a very good opportunity. Then the chairman for the AU now is Kagame, none other than Kagame. Probably the best president we have at the moment in Africa. Because of what he has achieved in his country, in Rwanda, it is important for us to put pressure on him to play a peer review role among his partners. We must have a way of name and shame situation at the AU, where people then know, even if we have to put big achievement banners next to each country, but we must do something. We must use this opportunity. And it's the same one who is hosting ICASA in 2019. So it is important that we strategize. It's important to know, to strike when the iron is hot. Identify opportunities where we can actually get mileage. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I would now like to actually open this up, because we can only do this if we work together. There are 3 microphones.
Lots of people. That's what I'd like to see.
It might be nice to use all microphones, or we're just going to use this one. Listen, we have one really big problem, and that is we have a very tight deadline, which is at 12:30, because apparently President Clinton is starting to talk 10 minutes later in the main hall. So I don't want to lose the audience while we still have a long line. Keep your comments short. You keep track of the points you want to react to later, and then at the end I'll give each of you 2 more minutes, yeah? So we have about 20 minutes for comments. We'll go very easily. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yours.
Thank you. My name is Princess Kasune Zulu. I'm a member of parliament in Zambia, and I'm HIV positive, openly known for my HIV status. And I know Dr. Ruth Laborde. I think one of the things I would put a critic on the conference is that you do have parliamentarians out there working on HIV. And I'm not just HIV positive now. I've lived for over 20 years with HIV. And I give credit to my constituency, rural constituency, voting me in to become a good example that people living with HIV can be parliamentarians, can be Congress people. And I think you need to encourage that as a conference. Then my question maybe to Dr. Ruth Laborde and maybe to, is it Dante from the UK, the colleague? How can we get members of parliament to test and be public about their status. Because as long as you can speak from an abstract point of view, from a theoretical point of view, to your point, we are going nowhere. Because there's no member of parliament out there saying, I am public and we need more of them.
Super point. Yeah. Floor is yours.
Mine? Okay. Hi, my name is Emily Malnick. I'm a constituent representative of yours, so I'm very glad that you're here. We talked a lot, you did, and other kind of high-income parliamentarians talked about decriminalization as a priority. And in the US and around certainly Western Europe, a lot of the issues are structural drivers of the epidemic, specifically housing inequality, income inequality, racism, stigma, things that HIV and even sex work, drug decriminalization laws don't address fully. And so, I know that you know very well what Oakland and San Francisco look like in terms of housing and the way that drives the HIV epidemic, both for folks who are at risk for contracting HIV and those who are living with HIV. So can you talk a little bit about kind of your plans to address those issues?
Thank you. Please, yours.
Yes, I just wanted to say, Susan Michael Strasser from ICAP at Columbia University. And as a Californian, I just want to say thank you to Barbara Lee. You definitely speak for me, and we need your voice more than ever. As a chair of the Democratic Caucus, I think it would be amazing to have a woman as the chair. And speaking truth to power for 2 decades, you're amazing, and we need you so much. If our country takes children from their mothers and fathers, what will they do for drug addicts and the HIV-positive people? Thank you.
Thank you. Yours.
Hi, I'm Howard Armstead. I'd like to address the challenge of ignorance. I represent the Public Eye newspaper in Lesotho. I've been HIV positive 34 years, and I've been an AIDS researcher for 27 years. I want to say to Barbara Lee, say hi to Maxine Waters for me, and to Stephen, say hi to Chris Smith, my friend Chris Smith. I was in the committee to incorporate West Hollywood in 1984. 1/4 of our membership died of AIDS, so you know where I'm coming from. I've lived for 15 years in Southern Africa, and I wanted to bring your attention to the biggest gap in AIDS research, which is selenium. And besides ARV, selenium is the best way to slow down HIV becoming AIDS, and it's even faster in increasing CD4 count than ARVs. I've attended 27 international AIDS conferences, and that none has ever had a panel on selenium. And this hurts every person in Africa, which I've been speaking up for many years. Okay, so we need to stop this ignorance. We need to stop the apartheid of not having a discussion on something that can boost the immune system. We need to suppress the virus, but we also need to work on the immune system, and I'll talk to all of you later.
Thank you very much. Floor is yours.
Yep. I'm Graham Brown from La Trobe University in Australia. My government, many governments, will pay universities a lot of money anyway, for well-researched, deep policy advice, that they can get that exact same advice, that same researched advice, direct from community organisations and peer organisations. I'd be really keen to hear about how we can get our parliaments to better value the advice and policy advice that they can get from peer organisations and perhaps actually pay for it.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Sir.
Thank you. My name is Martin Owino, Member of Parliament from Kenya. There's one area that I will need support from these beautiful people. I'm trying to put community health workers on a payroll. Because for one sure thing, biomedical intervention alone will not take away these AIDS. But the person who makes sure that the pills are taken on time, the person is supported, is accompanied to the clinics, is the community health worker. But right now, what happens to this sector of people is that they are paid on volunteer. I think we have a bigger goal here that you cannot achieve with volunteerism. So what I get as a resistance is when it gets to the budgetary committees and all this process, what they actually like is allocating money for higher-end machines, for testing, diagnostics, and all that, and for promotion and preventive medicine, very low-keyed. So I have a lot of resistance here. I need a wider support. I need a wider guidance how I can bring this to attention and get it passed. So I'm having a bill to address that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ruth.
Yes, thank you. I'm Ruth Messenger from AIDS Free World and American Jewish World Service. First of all, congratulations to the sex workers. Second of all, congratulations to this panel for their ongoing legislative bravery, and particularly to Barbara Lee. To all the Americans in the audience, when she asked what you need to do next, she didn't say it, but do the midterm elections. But I want to raise an issue which Mabel is well aware of that I want you to take back to your parliaments and think about. And that is that the ILO, a distinguished organization which works on the issue of child labor, does not recognize child marriage as child labor. They simply eliminate whatever number you want, 12 million girls a year. From the statistics, those girls are in permanent situations of ongoing labor without agency. And this is an issue that each of you can address, and I'm happy to talk with you about it later. I have some pamphlets. Thank you, Mabel.
Thank you, Ruth. Sir.
Yeah. My name is Dr. Boy.
Speak in the mic.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Dr. Boy. I'm a parliamentarian from Ghana. I have two quick questions or comments. One to Congresswoman Barbara Lee. I think one of the biggest challenges in Africa when it comes to HIV has to do with the cultural barriers. And in Ghana, just like in Zimbabwe, soliciting for sex is illegal. I remember police going around arresting some women. Now, I think the challenge is that I, as a doctor, I want to respect people who are sex workers, appreciate them, help to take care of them. But people interpret laws that are laws that want to protect such groups as a green light to encourage more people to come and join. And the cultural orientation is such that they don't want such a line. So the question is that in pushing for such rights, how do we ensure a fine balance between protecting and preserving and taking care of such groups and countering the argument that it is actually a green light to encourage more to come in? And then for TB, just like hypertension is a twin brother to diabetes, so is TB a twin to retro or immunosuppression most of the time. But one thing I've realized in the consulting room is that in Ghana, just like in many countries, anti-TB drugs are free. But most TB patients belong to the very low socioeconomic class. So you can give free drugs, but even without good food or nutrition, you can push the patient to death or threaten the patient. So the question is that as we do this advocacy, African leaders and most countries that are in the third world must be told bluntly that when you work to improve socioeconomic conditions, you can lift people out of some of these things. And I end with a quote, paraphrasing Dr. Luther King: immunosuppression anywhere is a threat to those who are immunocompetent, because we are all connected some way, somehow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To you.
Hi. I'm Cayenne Durashow, founder of Glitz. I'm a 54-year-old sex worker who's been in the business of advocacy for over 35 years. I've seen and buried over 300 people. I've seen communities in Cester and Forster lose their housing. And what housing remains if they're HIV positive is a box. We have already been criminalized and put in cages throughout our lives. How are we going to change homelessness for sex workers under the Cester and Forster bill? My community is being thrown out. Being a new founder, I am bringing people into my home, which is dangerous because there's no place for them to go. How are we going to be sure that our sisters and brothers are going to have a place to stay? Second, I would like to say, and then I'm done, A lot of my brothers and sisters are here that are sex workers. Because of 2020, I won't be able to hug them and embrace them. If they have it in San Francisco, I won't see these people again until we find a way to bring it back over here so our community can love on our community. This unification that we have here in the Netherlands is strongly a part of our lives. We are family. We need to be unified at least every 2 years together so we can fight this AIDS fight together. Thank you.
Great. I would love to see the conference back in Amsterdam, but I'm not sure the local organizing committee will survive organizing yet another one. They worked so hard. Please.
Yes.
Yeah. Anywhere but the U.S.
Yeah. Thank you. My name is Dr. Letitia Apia. I work with the National Population Council in Ghana. I would want to say that parliamentarians should be bold to talk about population growth rate in Africa. You know, we have focused so much on immunization, which is good. We're keeping the children alive, but then we're not reaping the gains along the line by refusing them reproductive health services. So we keep them alive, and then we leave them. Child marriage, teenage pregnancies are so high, and we know that it will fuel population growth and make HIV a challenge, dealing with it a challenge. So we have to be bold to talk about it. We have to be bold to talk about growth rates in Africa. Total fertility rate about 4. No country develops to get to a first world country. So we need to talk about that. We need to talk about reproductive health and position it rightly. Immunization and family planning are two sides of a coin. We cannot immunize the children for free and then keep reproductive health services away from teenagers and adults. Thank you.
Completely agree. Thank you. Now, we're going to do one last round of comments now. I'm going to then ask all our panelists to comment, and then if we have more time, we'll take more comments, yeah? But I'm worried that at some point there's nobody left in the room when they start giving feedback. Please.
Thank you for having the chance to speak here. My name is Christine Nagel. I come from Austria. I work as an NGO. And first of all, I want to apologize for my bad English because English is not my mother tongue. And two things I wanted to mention. First of all, for us sex workers, child marriage is an exploitation and has nothing to do with work. I think I speak in our name. And the next thing what I wanted to say, all those crazy laws, they are made to protect the society from prostitution, not sex workers. They have nothing to do with the rights of sex workers. And the main point is also that in Europe, you were talking about Europe, I'm in the board of the TAMPEP network. We have terrible laws influenced by the Swedish law, and this means this law kills sex workers. Really, we have a lot of violation, and we have a lot of abusing. People are abusing those laws, for instance, if they come from the police. And I really demand, don't talk about us, talk with us. Here is the TAMPEP contact, and in every country there will be a good group of people. Please speak with us.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the dear panelists to give us feedback. Please stick to about 2 or 3 minutes so that we maybe can get to yet another round.
Okay, thank you. There was an issue of MPs testing and coming out in the open. My sister from Zambia, MPs in Zimbabwe have gone for testing, and after testing, they've refused to tell the results. Testing they are doing, and then getting the RV and quietly going back into parliament. Then MPs working with civil society or academia. a lot of the information that my parliament gets, we are actually guided by civil society organization. We have a sex worker session in Zimbabwe that actually calls MPs and gives them information. Whatever we do in parliament is with the guidance of civil society. Then there was the issue of community health workers. We have the same challenge. Community health workers are not being paid, and when they are being paid, they're paid a pittance. I know there's a $20 per month transport which they get, that's all. And then on ILO and child marriage as a labor, I don't know what to say about that, but all I can tell you is that SADC has approved a law against child marriage. And in my country, it's now a crime, actually. Ghana, there was something about African countries. No, I'll go to the growth rate. The growth rate, my sister from Ghana, you must attend the parliamentary meeting in Uganda, which happens every September on growth rate. Take Zimbabwe, for example. Right now, the government feels we need people to grow. Zimbabwe for years has been stagnant between 12 to 13 million. We actually have been on the same place. We have done extremely well, I must say. We have a contraceptive rate of over 80%. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen.
Testing, sister from Zambia as well. We have testing sessions in Parliament. I've been and had tests. I've put it publicly on the internet, on Twitter, Instagram, whatever else. We're very lucky as well that Prince Harry went and had a public test on Instagram. I think testing rates went up, or inquiries about testing rates to Terence Higgins Trust went up by about 500% after he did that. So it's absolutely crucial that kind of public figures, MPs, the Royals, others, speak up, do this, make clear that testing is absolutely crucial. The question about procurement of research, I think, was a really, really interesting one. I mean, some of the best research and some of the best evidence I get comes from community-based organisations, not just university-based research, and it is absolutely invaluable, certainly to the work of our group in Parliament. Keeping it simple, getting those messages out there. You equals you, crucial message at the moment, crucial message that we have to get out there amongst Parliament. It's not fully understood. It's not fully understood globally, but the more simple, more straightforward, the better. The point about child marriage and the ILO definition, that is something I will definitely take away. The conference and where it should be next. I have serious worries about it being in the US as well. I love the United States. My grandfather, my real grandfather, was an American GI, came over in the Second World War. I've been to half the United States, and there are absolutely amazing Americans in every state of the United States. But, even as a British person now, filling in an ESTA form, I have to give my social media accounts so they can be looked at. I've not said some very complimentary things about the president. Is that going to prevent me going, let alone anybody else? So I think we've got to look at this issue very, very, very seriously. But, fantastic to be with Congresswoman Lee because, shows a lot of hope for the future of the United States.
Thank you. Isabel.
The things that I've learned here this morning is that there is so much inspiration in this group of people that are really, are touched by the subject in so many ways. One of the things that I see as the way out is, of course, to cooperate together. I've said it, I mentioned this earlier. We have to cooperate together, not to have our budgets and our attention scattered all over the place, but to try to focus
on decriminalization.
I don't know who said that. Decriminalization. Yeah, this is a very difficult subject because
it's not.
No, sorry. Yeah, this is my opportunity, but it's a very difficult subject, as I said, in my opinion. No, I can have my own opinion, I hope. Because it's so different in so many countries. That's what I wanted to say. The situation in the Netherlands is so very different from the situation in Zimbabwe or in Ghana or in
we
in
all
the United
experience
States.
violence. We just had a report
of course
out.
you
We're all
experience
being
violence. I know
betrayed
the
by
sorry,
our
we-
laws.
situation. No,
I do think we need to let Isabel finish her point. And I also, I'm going to ask you to finish, but there is something I know very little personally about the decriminalization of sex workers debate in the Netherlands. I know a lot about decriminalization of drugs and harm reduction. I would love to spend time with the people in the Netherlands who know about this, to learn more. And I think that any parliamentarian who wants to join that learning session would be really helpful. So if you could please help me with that would be great.
Yes, I think this is a very good idea. Thank you.
But let Isabel finish her point, because I think it's important that...
Yes, thank you. And of course, that's the idea, just to protect women, also men, obviously. One of the horrible things is, of course, the increase of discrimination, of more stigma, of taboo, that make it so difficult to address all these subjects. As I said, when there is a more conservative wind in countries, these are the issues that are first of all hurt by this new conservatism. And I wrote this down because I hardly use any paper anymore. Ignorance is one of the horror factors in this issue, I would say. The ignorance for people just to shut their eyes and hope that this whole thing will just disappear. We see this in so many countries. I also see it in the Netherlands. That is never the way out. So ignorance, as the saying says, is a bliss. But in this situation, I would say ignorance is hell, or will lead to hell, or to a horrible path that we will have to walk together. So we have to work together to fight this issue, and I'm very much willing to do so.
Thank you, Isabel. Ricardo.
Well, I'll try to be very quick. I know we're tight on time. Picking up on what my colleague from Zulu said, colleague Zulu from Zambia said, that MPs who belong to the people living with HIV community should have a stage. I completely agree. I wouldn't just say MPs, CEOs, government officials, leaders have to step up, but hopefully with the expectation that one day it won't be necessary, because it'll be just normal. And that's where we're not at yet, and I think it's extremely important. Following what Steve was saying about getting evidence to MPs, I have to reinforce the U equals U notion is extremely important. And to get that evidence and Unite as a network of parliamentarians is willing to work with civil society organizations in actually translating that evidence into something that is useful for politicians, that is understandable for politicians. And please reach out to us also to get your information so we can help from a parliamentarian's view on how to get that information to people that many times don't know what we're talking about. And we need to make sure that that information is translated in a way that is understandable for those that have to take decisions in the lawmaking scenarios. As for child marriage, I just have to say, please never confuse it with work. It's not. It's just purely unacceptable, and we have to fight against it everywhere and any way we can. I'd value what Dr. Boy said about, from Ghana, about raising the people from poverty as a general issue, not only for HIV/AIDS, but for health in general. The direct impact of raising from poverty is immediate when it comes to health and to well-being and to equality of opportunities. And I'd also like to thank the mentioning of homelessness here because among sex workers, because that is an issue that sometimes we tend to forget, which is the fact that the vulnerable communities tend to have multiple vulnerabilities. And the fact that we try to put people in boxes sometimes works against our main goal, which is to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to rise beyond their own difficulties and challenges within society. And last note on 2020, let's see where it is. But what I can say, and I say this securely, is that everyone on this stage will have an active voice and fight and making sure that anyone who wants to be at AIDS 2020 will be there to begin the decade that will end AIDS in 2030. And 2022, Portugal is open to welcoming you all there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Barbara.
Yeah. Well, let me say, first of all, I am not going to sit here and condone the policies of my own government, which deny sex workers and IV drug users and trans individuals And so I'm not going to sit here and do that, because I am a black woman and I come from a marginalized community. And so I know what that means. But I also have to say that all of my life I have been fighting, like I am fighting now, for sex workers in terms of decriminalization, in terms of equal opportunity and justice, because that's what it's about. Just as I have to fight for my own community in terms of coming from the African American community. And so just know that you have many people fighting, but we have a political issue in our country, and I can't say here where it's going, but just know that elections matter. This is a political struggle, and when you talk about voting, and when you talk about policies, and when you talk about funding, like in many countries, it is a political struggle. And so many of us are engaged in that political struggle on your behalf, but also with your input and your insight. And I think it's very important to continue to work with parliamentarians, with members of Congress, so that we can make some progress toward decriminalization and toward justice for everyone, because that is what it's about. And we can't do it as a parliamentarian, as a member of Congress alone. And so we have to have that push from the outside. And we have to have, California is leading the way in many respects. But on the other hand, when you look at, and we talked earlier, there were a couple of questions about, or statements about what's going on in California. When you look at the social justice issues, when you look at issues around homelessness, affordable housing, poverty, California in many respects is a tale of two cities, a tale of two states. We have enormous wealth and we have enormous poverty. And so I serve on the Appropriations Committee and the Budget Committee. And so part of my job as an appropriator is to try to get our federal resources reprioritized away from so much spending into defense, into housing, the Ryan White Program, Minority AIDS Initiative, PEPFAR, the Global Fund. And that's what we've got to do. And so just know that there are many members of Congress on your side, which is where the majority of the world stands. But we do have a struggle, and we have to fight. And in our country, this becomes, in many respects, partisan issue on some of the issues. But we want to make sure that, just as with PEPFAR and the Global Fund, which were not partisan, that somehow we find the space to make sure, and I want to get rid of the conscience clause, for example. There are many, many provisions of law that many of us are fighting for and on. And so just once again, thank you for being here, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak. But just know, in my own country, okay, in the United States, where I believe, we are one of the greatest democracies in the world, but there are many, many communities who have been left behind. And one of those communities are my community, the African American community, but we also have the Asian Pacific American community, the Latino community, and all ethnic communities that really still have not achieved parity. And so we have to fight for that, and that's what we're doing. Thank you again.
Thank you, Barbara. I would like to thank all of you for being here. I am very sorry to those who had wanted to talk that we didn't have enough time. I want to ask you to give a hand to these amazing parliamentarians. Thank you for your contributions. And thank you to the AIDS Funds, the Friends of the Global Fight, UAIDS, Stop AIDS, Amsterdam Planning Group, and the Global TB Caucus for helping IAS to put this panel together. Wonderful.
Thank you. And before everybody goes, sorry guys, Your Royal Highness, there's one person I would like to thank on behalf of all the organizers that you just mentioned. And this is you. You've been a great support for us in getting the conference, organizing the conference, facilitating sessions, speaking truth to power, speaking about human rights, speaking about key populations, speaking about young women and adolescent girls. And you're still here after a fantastic session. These flowers are for you.